Everyone, we're meeting this evening, the District Advisory Building Committee of the Portland Public Schools. Today is Thursday, July 23rd, and I'm Sarah Thompson, Board of Education member, as well as co-chair of the DABC, as well as Justin Costa, who is also co-chair of the DABC. And if we could just take quick attendance. I don't know who has the roll, Steve or Doug or Mark. Do one of you have listing of the names?
Emily, do you want to do it, or I can walk through it just off of the attendee of the panelists.
Okay, I can do that. Jessica Marino? Here. Paul Stevens? Want to unmute? Okay, I see you, Paul. All right, Abigail Fuller?
I'm here.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Abigail.
I've got a really shaky internet connection tonight, so I'm not hearing you well.
Okay, all right. Belinda Ray, counselor?
Yep.
Okay. Jay Norris?
Here.
Welcome. Matthew Winch?
Yep, here.
Mark Belafonte?
Here.
Superintendent Botana?
I am here.
Doug Sherwood?
Here.
Steve Stilfen?
Here.
And, okay. Mark Lee?
I'm here.
Emily Waugh?
Here.
Lisa Selwyn?
I am here.
Okay. And Emily Figdor, Portland Board of Public Education member, did let us know that she's traveling out of town this evening. So I think that we are ready to go, and I'll turn it over to Mark Lee from Harriman Associates. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very, very much, Sarah. And thank you all for joining us tonight. This is a July meeting. We typically in the past had not had a scheduled July meeting, but we felt that based on some of the comments and feedback we had at the last meeting, that we thought would be a good opportunity to enhance the communication rather than skip a month. And particularly in light of the subject we're going to spend most of our time focusing on tonight, which is sort of the path to how we arrived at the current scope and budgets for each of the three schools. And so with that, we had sent out the presentation prior to this to let folks kind of go through it, and we'll do our best to recap the events that sort of led to where we're currently at with the budget and the scope. And so that's really the focus of tonight's meeting. And so as we go through this, if you have questions, please, I guess we'll use the raise hand feature, and I'll ask that the co-chairs recognize you, and then they'll call on us, Harriman or whoever, for a response to that. So I think everyone by now is familiar enough with that. If you can't use the Zoom raise hand feature, I think we have in the past recognized that a physical raise hand works too. So either way. And so with that, can you all see my screen or the screen that says Portland Public Schools DABC meeting July 23rd? Maybe. Very good. We're in good shape. It's being broadcast.
Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Emily did just remind us, and I was trying to bring it up on my computer, but I can't seem to bring it up. The meeting minutes.
So Mark, I don't know whether it's you or me, but your audio is badly breaking up, and it might be my internet connection.
Can everyone hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, I think it might be you, Paul, unfortunately. So, Emily, I can't, on my other computer, unfortunately, it's not coming up with the attachments. So could you just provide us with the meeting minutes, the dates of those, please?
Sure. So I had sent a link to the website too, if that's easier for you guys to find things, but the dates of the meetings are order. So it was the latest June 18th. It was May 21st, and it was February 27th.
Great. And we did not approve these at the last meeting because we did not have a quorum, nor did we have a quorum at the prior meeting. So do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the 3 meetings that Emily just noted? Is there a motion?
Yep, so moved.
Councilor Ray, seconded by,
Quick thing, one thing, I don't know if now is proper, but I think Emily said June 18th. From what I see, it's June 25th. If someone.
Sorry, you're
double
right.
check.
thank you
You're
very
right.
much.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion by Councilor Ray, seconded by Board Member Balfons.
A second, yeah.
Thank you. Are there any errors or omissions on the meeting minutes? And we need to do a roll call for the approval of the meeting minutes. So as we call your name, if you could unmute and say yes or no, starting with Councilor Ray,
Yes.
School Board Member Balfons,
Yes.
Councilor Costa,
Yes.
Paul Stevens. I'll take that as a yes. Jessica Marino,
Yes.
Abigail Fuller. Yes. Okay. Jay Norris,
Yes.
Matthew Winch,
Yes, I'll also add that Brad Post is emailed and he's still not able to get into the meeting.
okay, thank you very much.
Janet, can you send Mr. Post a link, please?
Thank you. Okay, so with all those present, the meeting minutes for the 3 meetings are approved. And Mark, I apologize for interrupting, and please go ahead.
No, I think that worked pretty smoothly. So thank you very much. Very good. And that's item 1 on our agenda. So we'll continue right along. So the table that you have before you, and hopefully again, that if you can't see it on the screen or read it very well on the screen, you're able to download the presentation and see it. But it goes through the various dates and tracks the budgets, both the construction and total for the 4 schools. And we're going to kind of walk through each of these just to chronology of how we arrived at them, and if there are any questions as we go through those. But we've essentially excerpted slides from the presentations of each of those meetings, beginning with our February 6th DABC meeting, in which we came forward with a budget update. But we'll sort of even start a little prior to that. But this was from the 2/6 meeting, the February 6th meeting, where, yep.
Can I also just point out that there is a memo in the packet that sort of chronicles all of what you're going to hear in narrative form as a memo. So that's also there for those who, if you haven't read it already, it's been a part of the packet.
Excellent. Yes, thank you very much, Javier. So, and again, if I miss any of the points or there are questions as we go along, please don't hesitate to interrupt, and we'll address those.
Recognize that Brad Post just joined us.
Great. Good evening, Brad. So the top was the chart that we began when we began the LICEF project, and so it was established by PPS just prior to the LICEF start, and it assumed that we were going to be doing a school every year, once a year, beginning in 2019, and so what it did was it actually took numbers that were derived prior to even beginning this, which were developed during the BFOF bond, and it brought them back to present day, and then it extended them out going forward from present day to assume what the total project cost would be for each of the schools. And so that is arrived at a $59 million project cost, which the total bond was 64, and that meant that there was a $5 million surplus, as we've been tracking that throughout the project. The lower table is what we arrived at as we looked at bidding all of the projects in 2021. As you know, the idea was, instead of doing one bid a year for 3 successive years. We would do all 3 schools, Presumpscot, Longfellow, and Reiki, all in 2021. And that essentially looked at what those costs would look like. And so it was a slightly different projection of total project costs of $60.7 million. And that also took into account what we actually ended up spending on LICETs. And so we had to use some of the surplus funds and applied them to the LICET project. And so we had the actual LICET amount plus the projected amounts for the 3 schools. So that's kind of where the buckets of money appropriated for each of the schools came from. And so it was approximately $13 million for Presumpscot, $14.6 million for Longfellow, and $16.3 million for Reiki. Also, what
Does
we did
everybody
during that.
can you pause for a second and just, I want to make sure, because this has been part of our, challenge is, I just want to make sure that everybody is following along. So if we can just pause every once in a while and give people an opportunity to sort of process and, ask any questions that they may have, I think that would be super helpful, Mark. Sorry to interrupt your flow.
Good. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any questions from anybody at this time? Okay, Mark, continue. Thank you.
All right. And so on the February 6th meeting, we presented a couple scenarios. One scenario we called classrooms, and that classroom scenario looked at, I'll say that the reason we came up with the 3 scenarios is because, as we understood, trying to do the full BFOF scope or doing the LICET scope would have exceeded the available funds. And so therefore we were looking at different scenarios to accomplish scope, and we looked at them in a couple different ways. The first way we looked at, we called the classrooms, and it really, the reason it was called classrooms, it'll become evident as we go through this, but in some ways, we recognize that just calling it classrooms doesn't really fully describe what the scope of the work is, but there's a way of just sort of naming them simply. And so for Longfellow, that scope included classroom addition for art and music and pre-K. It also included abatement and renovation of existing classrooms, a secure entry, an elevator, and miscellaneous upgrades. And so the reason that this was called the classrooms will become evident as we compare it to the gymnasium scheme, for instance. So that was Longfellow, and I will make note in this one that it does show at this time that there was intended for art, music, and pre-K, and the renovation of the existing classrooms. And the scope that was presented for Presumpscot showed the replacement of the portables, and that's a 10,000 square foot structure to replace the 6 classrooms that are currently housed in portables, the secure entrance, and then miscellaneous upgrades with life safety and code upgrades. And then for the Reiki, it was to construct the classroom walls and really limit the work to that on the school side, not the community side. And in addition to creating the classrooms, it was the miscellaneous code upgrades. So that was presented as the classroom scenario 1. We also looked at the separate gyms, which would mean that we would, at Longfellow, instead of building the classroom for art, music, and pre-K, we would look at doing a new gymnasium. We would also, in this case, not do renovations to the existing classrooms, which encompassed the abatement of hazardous materials at Longfellow. The separate gyms did not do the abatement and renovation of the existing classrooms, and it did not address the pre-K art, music, or I'll say also any other classroom spaces currently housed in the lower level of Longfellow. It did also carry forward the secure entry, the elevator, and the miscellaneous upgrades. And then Presumpscot was the classroom addition to replace the portables, a new gym, the secure entrance, and the miscellaneous upgrades. For Reiki, it was the same scope that we had an option, the classroom options. And so in some ways, because Reiki already has separate gyms. So this would have created new separate gyms on all 3 schools. That was why we called it separate gyms, separate from the cafeterias. And the last option that we came up with was to renovate the gyms and add cafeterias. And that was, I think, largely through conversations that we'd had with this committee. And the idea was that if we could keep the existing gymnasiums, the cafeterias are smaller than the gymnasium, so we would save money by adding on smaller additions to the buildings. And so that was a new cafeteria warming kitchen for Longfellow, the secure entry, elevator, miscellaneous upgrades. Presumpscot was, again, instead of the gym adding a gym, it was adding the cafeteria warming kitchen, but everything else stayed the same. And Reiki, again, is the same in all 3 scenarios. And that carried forward on a discussion that the committee had, and the principals of all 3 schools were present at that November 27th meeting.
Can I pause? Can I pause for a second? Let's just take stock on those 3 scenarios and make sure that that's clear to everyone, and maybe, you know, just track how those costs varied from, you know, from iteration to iteration, and also how they compared against the initial cost, the initial projected costs for the project.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are any questions at this time for anybody? Okay, seeing none. Go ahead, Mark.
So, and again, this is great. I appreciate the stopping me as we go through. And so you can see that we originally, the classroom scenario looked at a $15.5 million project cost for Longfellow, and $10 million project cost for Presumpscot, $20 million for Reiki, and a $45.5 million total for those 3, adding in the Lyseth one, told us roughly where we were at. So at the 2/27 meeting, those are the 3 scenarios for classroom, or for those are the 3 prices for scenario 1 classroom. The Longfellow scenario 2, the separate gyms, because it didn't include the abatement and renovation of classrooms, which was targeted or earmarked at $8 million. There was a, and it essentially created just the addition of the gym was less in the scenario 2. Presumpscot, because it had the replacement of the classrooms, and in addition to that, it added a gym, that value went up. The Reiki value, as you see, is the same in all 3 scenarios. And so, so you can see the difference from our first presented budgets on the 2/6 to the options that we presented on 2/27. And then if people are good with understanding how those different scenarios, again, they didn't necessarily adhere to any of the budgeted amounts that were established early on. What they did was just looked at the different scopes and how much those scopes would cost. And so at that time, it was breaking up the funds differently to accomplish those scope objectives.
Can I just do a little bit of a background piece on that? If you could just keep that slide there. And I apologize if this is, you know, too repetitive for people, but I just feel like it's important that we ground ourselves well in this. I think you have to remember that when we looked at that Lyseth scope budget, this group was very clear, and you know, at that time we posed the question about whether we should move forward with all 3 projects. There was a significant conversation about the fact that obviously this is very disappointing. We can't do what we set out to do when the FOF started. And so bringing back those three scenarios was at the urging of this group to look at, you know, a way to do something conceptually that we could, you know, latch onto and say, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And so that's the charge that we gave as DABC and board to the to Harriman, and that's how they brought back those three scenarios. So, you know, you have to remember that this is sort of grounded in the fact that to do the Lysith scope at this point with the projections that the estimates that our estimator came up with was well beyond the amount of money that was available.
Very good. Very good. So any questions before I go through a slide? I think that sort of tries to capture some of the conversation after the three options were presented. I'll go there. We can
Mark,
always move back. Yeah.
I just noted in the chat, I'm wondering what happened to the secure entrance at Reiki.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And so when we looked at where we were budget-wise, one consideration was that we did not have the secure entrance shown in the scope of work. So at this stage in time, that was kind of where things were established with the scope. That I think you'll see, Paul, from the conversation, that item moved back in subsequent revisions of the scope for the scenario one.
Okay, thanks.
And so, all right. So the noted in the meeting was that Principal Young was concerned about adding an addition to Longfellow because of so many of the existing interior needs, and he was worried that if we moved in that direction, and they wouldn't be addressed. So the scenario 2 and scenario 3 did not have much work on the interior. They had the additions and left the classrooms as they were. He said that if it were, or as he saw them, the priorities included the electrical upgrades, the asbestos remediation, the flooring and lighting upgrades, brickwork repairs, windows that opened, and an elevator. And then he said that in the process, he would like to discuss further with staff to understand their sense of what the priorities were. And then we had Mr. Costa noted that in an advisory group, that the DABC was an advisory group, not a decision-making body. And then the idea was we needed to move in a way that allowed the project to move forward and get it ready for bid in the fall. And then Councilor Ray felt that we should use the classroom scenario as a template, but shouldn't be married necessarily to all the particular features around it. If funding needed to shift from one school to the other to accomplish the sort of preferred scenarios and priorities at each school. And then Chair Thompson noted that because we're changing from an overall equity model, a bigger decision would be needed by the board, and so that shift away from the equity that was kind of the goal of BOF, we should be engaging the board in an understanding of what direction we were moving to. And then Mr. Winch recommended adjusting the scope based on the principal's feedback and allowing Harriman to work further with each of the three school administrations to understand what the particular needs and priorities were. And so I think the terminology in the spirit of the classroom scenario was the recommendation to the board. And then there was consensus on moving forward with that recommendation in the spirit of classroom scenario, which was scenario 1. and for Harriman to further meet with the principals to determine those priorities. So that was the conversation and outcome of the February 27th DABC meeting.
Mark, I have a question. It's Jay Norris.
Yes, Jay, yeah.
I appreciate this. I know that, and I apologize to everyone involved. I've been away for a few months. I appreciate this, but one of the concerns I have about Harriman, doing our minutes and doing these presentations, from the beginning, I think one of my passions about being a part of this body, realizing it is just that, we're just here to sort of make recommendations to the board. I've been very passionate about our money and how we're spending time versus money, and how Harriman is managing to the funds that are available, and what our deadlines are. A couple of things, I just happen to have my notes from February. Looking at the consensus to move forward in the spirit of, I don't think that's really entirely accurate. I won't split hairs there, but that's not what I noted, because I actually noted part of that discussion. And there are many times during the process throughout the last year or two that I know I and other people have pushed back and have asked questions about line items and expenditures, and maybe things like why we are spending $2 million. What is the breakdown for a $2 million entryway when we're spending $0.5 million for an elevator? So while I appreciate this, I don't think you're capturing everything. And I think that it's really important for posterity that if you guys are going to be managing the communications, and really you're the keeper, you're sort of our employee, and you're kind of keeping the narrative of this. I'd like to maybe see some of the other points that are mentioned, maybe going forward from here, when there is a little pushback, when there is noted concern. I think it's important that we track that, because this has seeped out into the media a little bit. You're seeing more people out in the community kind of wondering where this process is and the money that we're spending. So I'm just asking if we can track that a little bit better, a little bit more transparently when there are concerns on things like this matter. I'd certainly appreciate it. I know there are things that I brought up that I've noted that are kind of nowhere in this in this dialogue that you have here. And I was at that February meeting. I remember some of the points that I rose. So maybe just going forward from here, we can capture some more bullet points of from everyone, and not just kind of the more genteel comments that are agreeing or in support of what the recommendations are by Harriman.
Yeah, I think Superintendent Botana.
Yeah, can I say something? So I do want to point out, Mr. Norris, that you, along with this whole body, just approved the meeting minutes from February 27th, where your comments, the ones that you just referenced, are fully documented and noted, and that the consensus item, so the bottom line, the approval of moving forward in the spirit of the classroom scenarios, is also reflected in those minutes that were just approved. So I don't think this slide does pick out specific aspects of it that support the why we moved in the direction that we moved, but everything else that was said is noted at a level that goes far beyond what we do, for example, with any of our school board deliberations, or the council does with its deliberations. So I think, in Harriman's defense, that we've actually been very detailed in capturing the notes from every, sort of from each of these meetings and the discussions. And so the points that you raised and those concerns were reflected in those minutes. They'll be reflected in the minutes for today's meeting as well, when those come before this body.
I appreciate that, Mr. Superintendent. I am here at your service. I get that. I understand and have become accustomed to you being a big fan of Harriman, and you cheer them very, very robustly, and I've come to accept that as well. But I think there's a lot of context around that. And again, I don't want to split hairs. You are right that the minutes do capture a lot of that, but I happen to think that there are things, I've seen things in the past that we do not capture. We can't necessarily capture every word, but I do think where there are questions that would serve us well, some of that minutia we do carry forth. so that maybe we can show, even the school board members might be able to see where there is a little dialogue or a pushback or a disagreement on something that they might be able to reference later on down the line if things do kind of go off the rails again. So that's kind of where I was coming from, not necessarily an indictment, just, you know, maybe in these brief kind of presentations here that we can kind of note where we had a little discourse would be helpful.
Thanks, Jay, for your feedback. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.
Very good.
Any other questions at this time? Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Excellent. Thank you. And so subsequent to that meeting, Harriman did meet, as was discussed at the meeting, with representatives in particular. I think one of the things that we really wanted to understand in light of the comments made by Principal Young was the idea of a classroom. What would the classroom scenario look like, and what particular priorities would the Longfellow community are they interested in supporting? And so it was, I believe, Steve and Doug, Terry, myself, Emily, and met on March 13th, as it were, and laid out the plans and discussed what would be the best option for Longfellow. And the idea was that doing the abatement of the whole school was going to consume a great deal of the funds. And so we'd have to consider whether or not to do that or add additional program space. But there wasn't enough money in the budget to be able to add significant amount of program space and do the abatement of the school. And so that's, there was even a sort of conversation that followed that said, well, is there a way of sort of doing a partial abatement or remediation of the hazardous materials? And our response was, you can't, you either remove the material or you don't. You can encapsulate material, but you can't sort of either, you know, right now most of it is not friable, or all of it is not friable. Most of it is in some of it's encapsulated in areas where it aren't exposed, but floor tile and ceilings are in exposed finishes. And so so that conversation said, no, if you're going to do the abatement, we're going to be required to do sort of a full abatement and then replace the finishes that do have asbestos in them. And then Principal Young noted that he thought his families would be supportive of scenario 1A if there was any money left over from that scenario, which was the abatement and renovation of the classrooms, it should be spent on getting the learning spaces out of the basement. But he also noted that he was not sure, and we weren't sure at that point how much we would have left over to be able to add to an addition to the building. And so he also asked to sit down with his staff and parents to get their opinion, and he went and further surveyed the staff to get comments from them. I'll pause here.
Jessica?
Hi. So my first question is, I'm curious, is this, so there were no minutes taken at this meeting. This is a kind of a summary based on your recollection of the meeting. Is that correct?
No, we have minutes. Emily took minutes.
Okay. You presented him with option 1A and option 1B, but not with the original spirit of the classrooms approach. Is that correct?
I think we had a full conversation that included where we started with the entire. And he was actually present, I think, at that meeting on February 27th as well.
I just think it's worth noting that our meeting on February 27th, the Longfellow plan that we talked about, as you said, was 15.5 million. And then 1A is a $14 million project and 1B is a $12 million project. So he wasn't really, so I mean, in the context of this discussion, he didn't really have the option of saying, you know, if he's kind of being presented with 1A or 1B, he's not being given an option with an addition, correct?
At that time, again, what we're trying to do is just fine tune the option one, the classroom option, to understand what the various priorities as he understood them were. The idea was that we didn't say you have this much money or this much money. We just want to understand what, and so as the notes reflect, what he said was that he felt that the families would be supportive of 1A, and if there was money left over, to get the programs out of the basement. So it was not necessarily saying you can or cannot. It was saying this is what the priorities would be.
So who, when you revised the plans after our February meeting, before the March 13th meeting, and the plans were revised before you got administrator input, the plans were revised with changes to the budget. So, you know, at some point, who took that $15.5 million plan and, you know, revised it to two plans that were significantly less money. I feel like when we talked about in the spirit of the classrooms, we did not talk about, you know, and we talked about fine tuning. To me, fine tuning is not millions of dollars being shifted from one project to another. I mean, we spent 2 months talking about $500,000 at Lyseth. So I just think, you know, so I guess my issue has just always been that decisions, I think, were made out of the public eye. So
yeah, thank you, Jesse. I think the big change that precipitated that redirection of shifting of the funds was when Presumpscott came forward and said that we absolutely, it's one of our high priorities is to have a separate space from cafeteria and the gym. And so again, that was I think a discussion point that was had at the February 27th meeting. I'm not saying that there wasn't conversations regarding the needs at any of the other schools, but particularly that came forward. And so in the revised classroom scheme, it had the addition for a separate cafeteria from gym at Presumpscott, and that shifting of funds, and that was, again, that was a priority that was expressed at the 27th meeting. So I think that's part of it. And again, I think Lisa was also part of the that February 27th meeting. I was not there, but and maybe Lisa, I don't know if you recall it differently than that or not.
I think the notes from that meeting reflect that was the principal's priorities. And we have each of the principal's priorities noted from that. Those were Presumpscott's priorities. And I think you reflected that well, or captured that well.
Jessica, you all set?
So I mean, just, you know, to kind of I guess my last point is that I don't think the intention was for the principals to be the ones making any kind of final decisions. So, but thank you.
All right, I'm going to go to Javier and then to Matthew. Javier, you got to unmute.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So I guess the point that I do want to make, and I definitely don't want to be combative about it, is that the, you know, part of the direction that the staff received at that meeting was to consult with the principals to find out what were the non-negotiables in that. And I think that, you know, at the core, this is exactly why we had the conversation back in February, when we realized that we weren't going to be able to do everything and looked for different scenarios to be able to do that. And, you know, the money that moved, you know, so Reiki in all three plans costs more than what was originally budgeted for Reiki, or if you go to the first slide, right? So right there, some money came out of the other two projects in order to be able to do that. And then, you know, the remaining shift was, you know, taking what was 15.5 at Longfellow and 10 at Presumpscott, and evening that out some. And the way in which that was accomplished was by choosing the, you know, the gym scenario for Presumpscott, because that was the principal's reflecting that community's values, top priority, and fixing the interior at Longfellow, which was that principal representing that community's perspective. And I will add that in addition to the meeting that Harriman and facilities staff had, I had 2 separate conversations processing this with Principal Young, because he was struggling with the fact that, there wasn't enough money to do everything that they wanted to do, and that he had some big choices to make. And, he landed on, it made more sense to do the abatement and getting those rooms to where they would be fully functional than having some of the other changes that he obviously would also like to see in place.
Thank you, Superintendent. Jessica, do you have anything further?
No, I mean, really everything that I've said before, that I said at the last meeting, that I agree with the superintendent, and that was what we asked Harriman to do, was go back to the principals. But I think as we go along through the next slides, what we'll see is that it never came back to us. It never came back to the DABC before it moved on to being presented as the plan. So, I mean, all of my questions are just around process and transparency. But yes, thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Valid. I'm going to move to Matthew.
Yeah, well, Jessica just hit on part of what I was going to say, is that we went from February 27th to April 23rd with no real substantive update from anybody. And in that period of time, between February 27th and April 23rd, $3 million was shifted. 1.5 came out of Longfellow and 1.5 went into Presumpscot, more or less. The math may work out differently. And then it didn't really come to the surface. We didn't quite fully cotton on to that until probably May, when questions started being asked about scopes and noticing that budget lines had shifted. So, from my perspective, going all the way back to the February 27th meeting, I'd made a partial recommendation there about, a pathway forward, and it was certainly seen as a pathway forward and taken as such, but then nothing was ever communicated back to us. And it seems like decisions were made somewhere outside. I even looked at some of the school board minutes, and as you acknowledged, Sarah, they are not as robust as what Emily provides us, which is certainly appreciated here. But it wasn't really telling there that the school board made any type of a acknowledgement, a shift of money from one bucket to another. So that's what frustrates me, is that yeah, we are an advisory group, but I hear that so much. I've gone and looked up the definition of advisory, and it basically says that we give recommendations, and we didn't really give a recommendation on taking 1.5 million away from Longfellow and shifting it someplace else. And then to further Jessica's point, we did speak ad nauseum at the time about money for LICEF. So it just seems that again it's more process about the end outcome. It's probably where it needs to be, but it's just a lesson in how poorly things were communicated between February and April and May.
Thank you.
I just would like to respond to that. I first of all, I take that and accept it. I think that we obviously had a few things going on in between the board meeting on March 17th, where this issue was discussed, right? So at that time, the presentation that the board saw actually looked at these different variables, and there was a significant amount of discussion about the fact that the DABC had recommended to staff that we go back and work with principals to actually sort of fine tune, but that the DABC was in fact advising to move forward, with the 3 schools and with the in the classroom perspective. And then, as you can see in the chart that's on the screen, we did, quickly convene the BLAC and, subsequently had another community forum without convening the DABC. And so I acknowledge that that period of time that lapsed in there was one where we probably would have been better, not probably, definitely would have been better off coming back to the DABC before we had the BLAC meeting. And, I take responsibility for that. There were lots of different things going on, and I just figured we could jump over that one step because so many of you are also engaged at the BLAC level. And so, I acknowledge that, and that's, I think, where this, the sense that you didn't know the closure that had been brought to it. But when we went to the DABC on 4/23, we had these scenarios largely in the shape that they currently are.
Matthew, do you have anything further? Okay. Jay had a question. You're all set now, Jay? Okay. Anyone else? Sorry?
No, that was me, Sarah. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm going to move ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and this chart shows the consistency from this point. So the presentation to the board occurred on the March 17th, and this at this time things were starting to go into COVID crisis mode, and I think that contributed to some of the aspects of the challenge of convening. But I think we all recognize, certainly Harriman recognizes that step that we that would have been really important to have the DABC plugged in during that portion right there would definitely have contributed in a positive way to all of you understanding where the scope was and how it had moved to that point. Because you're right, the DABC didn't see it again until the 21st, and while many were involved at some level at the planning for the community forum or attending of the community forum, or even understanding if they had seen it, the presentation to the board, you as a committee and as a body recommending, you hadn't seen it. So we also recognize that if there's anything that we didn't do in that, in light of trying to get that information in front of you, then we certainly recognize that that would have worked better too. So I think we've tried to double down, making sure that there's certainly an easy access to information and detailed information, and moving forward in that light as well. So I guess I don't necessarily know if we need to go through the next series of the slides, but again, I think there's consistency that you'll see in the scenarios, and I certainly can, and I'm willing to. I think that. I'm sorry?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, very good. So the presentation to the board included let's just make sure that, so classroom, it showed where we started with scenario 1, and as the options to reduce the scope. And then it then said, it showed the scenario 1A, which included the abatements at Longfellow and the secure entry and some fine tuning of some of the miscellaneous items that added another $1 million or so to that scope. But it clearly in the revised classroom scope does not show the addition for pre-K, art and music. And you do see in this 1A that there's the cafeteria warming kitchen at Presumpscot at $3 million in value there. So that is where we see the 1A presented to the board. And then these tables followed that identified where we heard priorities, where the staff had heard priorities, and how that aligned with the scope that was being presented. So, and so this was the 1A matrix, and you can see again that the items below the sort of bar in the middle included items that from scenario 1 that were dropped from scenario 1 to scenario 1A, and so the classroom addition was dropped from that. So, and then 1B, again, that the secure entry for Longfellow was there. The elevator upgrades, the life safety, and this one had the addition for a cafeteria, and then renovation for program spaces, but it did not have the abatement. So 1A had the abatement, 1B had new program spaces or renovation, but not an addition for program spaces, but it did have an addition for cafeteria. And so that was the 1B scenario that was presented at the time that we were looking at this. Presumpscot didn't change from the previous, from 1A, that was essentially the same scope. And Reiki didn't change as either. So, and then this was the matrix identified for Longfellow. And so it, 1B didn't have the addition for art, music, or pre-K, and it did not have the abatement for the classrooms and that configuration. So, so then there was a follow-up meeting with Principal Young, who said that the impact that the staff was looking for was investment in their classrooms over adding more program space, and that they didn't want to go through all of this and not have the classrooms dramatically changed. Staff did not feel that the new secure entry was necessary, but he recognized that this was a priority, a district priority, and he thought the plan made sense. He noted that big staff items they were looking to have in their classrooms were lighting, electrical, windows, and HVAC. And so those priorities did come forward as desired improvements to the classrooms. And if they were just going to do encapsulation, they would like to put the additional funds towards an expansion of the cafeteria, HVAC, or windows. And so that was also identified, again, as part of, if there were additional funds, those are staff priorities. His big takeaway, he said, from the staff was it made no sense to do an addition, and to move forward with 1A and look for opportunities to add in some of the scope that they couldn't achieve. And then the BLAC meeting on the 23rd shared the floor plans with the scope of 1A. And so it showed the elevator in the lower level. It showed the renovation of the admin entrance area and the renovation of the classrooms, essentially the abatement of classrooms on all levels, and renovation of toilet rooms for accessibility as well. So again, that was the Longfellow scope that was presented at the BLAC meeting on the 23rd. And then the community forum, we identified let me pause, I guess. Is there any question on the previous content?
I don't see any hands.
All right.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Very good. So the community forum identified where we work with the scenario 1A with the construction and project budgets for the 3 remaining schools. And the following DABC meeting showed what our feedback was. The highest priority facility needs being the classroom abatement, secure accessible entrance, elevator, code, and accessibility upgrades. And so those Also, again, the floor plans, which were the same floor plans identified in the community forums. So those should be very familiar at this point. And then most recently, so that's where we were after the community forum and the most recent DABC meeting. Most recently, we've had updates on the price for the remediation, the abatement and remediation of the classrooms, and they're less than what we had originally budgeted, to the point where we're exploring right now, can we do the full renovation of the classrooms as identified in scheme in scenario 1A, as well as an addition for the cafeteria, warming kitchen, and a small portion of spaces that are identified on the lower level as, and this is again pretty tough to see, but take my word for it. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not moving. So can people see my circling around a square? Yep, very good. So that's the cafeteria, warming kitchen at the lower level of the building. So right now, this is the art room. This is a mechanical room, and this room right here shares with special service programs. And the idea is to take those program spaces that are mostly considered sort of subterranean and put those into the addition where they're daylit over on this corner of the building. And so it's really to take substandard space and provide them with daylit, well-ventilated space on the addition, on a small addition to Longfellow. And then that's at the lower level. And then at the upper level, there would be a pre-K room adjacent to, so this is a stair right here that's required for egress, but we'd have the kindergarten rooms right here, and then we'd have a pre-K room right here, and then we could even build the cafeteria potentially to receive future structure and if there's or allowing the ability to grow in that location in the future for additional program space. So we think with that scenario right now, we're to look to see if we can incorporate that, but we're feeling encouraged by some of the pricing that we received on the renovation of the classroom spaces. So, and staying within the 1A budget for Longfellow. And that's kind of hot off the press scope that we have right now in development of where we are. The second floor would look the same as what we've programmed to date, and that is with creating the connector to the elevator. So the elevator serves all 3 floors, conversion of this last classroom into a resource room. But in this scenario, it's clear to point out that the music room would stay where it is, and art room would stay where it is on the lower level as well. So I'll pause here again if there are any questions or comments on our current direction.
Jessica?
Hi. So the kids would go into the basement to get to the cafeteria, and I just can't see, do they go down a new staircase or do they go down the old staircase at the front of the building to get down there?
Yeah, they could do either, Jessica. So they could come down here and go to the cafeteria here, as well as they can come down this stair right here to come down and go right to the cafeteria.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Matthew?
I just wanted to quickly ask Mark, can you remind us the scope of the mechanical HVAC improvements in each of these facilities under the 1A scope?
Yeah, under the 1A scope, very, very limited. Almost no work to the mechanical systems. What we would do is look to improve the controls, as well as we'd evaluate some of the unit ventilators to see if there are dampers that are inoperable and motors that are working correctly or not. But it does not do a full replacement or any degree of replacement of the existing HVAC system as part of this. Right now, we're trying to figure out if there are alternate ways of funding and accomplishing that, but that's kind of a separate project that is being considered right now. And the reason that we kind of looked at the renovation work that we're doing if we took a lot of the money that we're investing in the facilities and put it into the HVAC system, the challenge we had is that we wouldn't be able to upgrade where the abatement is. So to simplify it a little bit, if we take out all the asbestos flooring material, you got to put something back. You just can't take out the asbestos flooring material and leave the floor as it is. And the same thing with the ceiling. So we have to take out the abatement from the ceiling material, and then we have to put a new ceiling back and new lighting. And so it's the idea that if we divert funds from those to the mechanical system, the challenge then becomes we can't do that scope of work halfway. The other classroom renovation scope halfway. We have to at least achieve that. So the questions could come up, for instance, well, could we, instead of doing the cafeteria and pre-K room, could we use that money to put into the mechanical system? And that is a possibility. We think and we did this approach with Lyseth, where it's more likely in the future that you'd undertake a mechanical system upgrade than it is that you would come again to do a capital project to do an addition to the school.
And that all makes sense. I think it's just sort of us being faced with a hindsight question in the middle of, discussions over, schools reopening in the autumn and air and ventilation and air circulation. And I know the struggles that Steve and Doug and Javier are having around sort of planning out spaces. That's really the genesis. The reason I'm asking the question is it, I prefer seeing this addition off the back of Longfellow personally, but it's still just sort of lingering in the back of my mind. What type of conversation should we be having given the reality of things that have changed, the course of things that have changed over the last few months? That's all.
Excellent point, Matt. It's one of those things where mechanical systems in buildings are actually one of the most expensive subsystems of a building. And so unfortunately, if it were easier to accomplish, I think we would definitely try to move in that direction. But and I recognize that COVID is a different game than when we originally approached the discussion about the mechanical systems.
Yeah, no, it's not really directed at you, Mark. It's more, I think, for this committee to maybe have it on record that we've spoken about it and acknowledge the prohibitive costs that we're dealing with. And I don't know if that lends credence to any money that may or may not be coming from the state. And again, this is more steering it towards staff and school board members, but just something to consider on as the course of these projects take shape, because obviously as expensive as mechanical systems are, it's easier to do them in the middle of a construction project than to try and do them a year, 18 months, 2 years down the road after a project completes. That's all.
Thank you, Matthew. Going to Councilor Costa.
Thanks, Sarah. So I just wanted to sort of pick up the thread about communications earlier and just ask how is what we were just talking about with the estimates and the potential for that to change the scope of work at Longfellow being communicated to other stakeholders? So like I recognize that there's already a memo uploaded on the new dedicated website, which looks great and all of that. But how is that actually being pushed out to board members, the BLAC, and the broader school community?
Yeah, I guess Justin, the way the process we're following is to first confirm what our numbers are before we go too far. But we felt it was important enough to share that the preliminary figures that we're getting with this body, and once we're more confirmed with what those renovation costs and the addition costs are, to confirm it with this group and first, and then to update the board and the BLAC committees as well.
Okay, so this is probably just more of a comment to Javier at this point, but just that's what I want to make sure that we're following up on, because there's definitely going to be conversations in the school community. I mean, I live a block from Longfellow, and you know, everyone's shutting their homes, so anyone that cares about this stuff is just going to get bits and pieces of information, and it all can kind of snowball easily. So just, I don't need to micromanage the process, but however we want to do it to make sure that the basic information is being communicated to all of the various stakeholders, I think will serve us all very well, so that you don't have to deal with lots of confusion about any changes that come up down the road, or any confusion about where we are in the process right now.
I think it's a point well taken. Frankly, this is news to me. So, you know, I think that just some of these things are evolving as they go. And, you know, we've talked about that with the chairs, about, you know, the fact that we meet a week before the meeting and that things could evolve in the week leading up to the meeting. So the deck that might be there on this Thursday might be slightly different from the one that we discussed, you know, a week ago. But yeah, and I think the other piece that I will add to this is we have now, and Harriman leads this work, implemented this project update document, which is next on the agenda, and those project updates will reflect those changes. So I think it's good for us to think about how do we highlight what's different, you know, than what you may have previously seen. And, you know, for us to figure out how to get schools to push this out in their communication and things along those lines, because, you know, obviously it'll be up on the website and it'll be on the DABC communication and so on. But for people to not find out at Pat's meat market and instead find out through school or something, I understand what you're pushing for.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Jessica Marino?
So to follow up on a couple of those things, I wonder if an email could go out after this meeting to the Longfellow BLAC with these slides, just because they might not even know that we're meeting. So just kind of, or maybe the minutes from this meeting, just so that they're in the loop that this is happening, because they're not meeting again. By the time they meet with you again, we'll be starting school, and there will be a whole other, you know, set of topics out there to discuss. So, I mean, I just think keeping the BLAC in the loop would be helpful. I think this is great, as I'm sure you can imagine, that I would be very happy seeing this proposal. I'm operating under the assumption that this still would fall within the $14 million-ish budget. I just don't want any, I don't want us to fall into the trap again of this taking away from any of the other schools, you know, because the other schools are planning on moving forward with what's been presented to their BLAC. So I just, but overall, this feels much more equitable to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Any further questions at this time? Okay, go ahead, Mark. Thank you.
Very good. So I think the next item that we had was the schedule next steps. I think the updates, I'm actually going to ask Emily Waugh our next scheduled update and where we are with the update flyer that we send out. Emily, when is our next scheduled flyer? Do you have that information to put you on the spot a little bit here?
Sorry, hold on one second. I mean, I tend to do it right around the beginning of the month, so, but I think, bear with me.
And as Emily's doing that, the other part, I guess, to address the timing of the communication, we have established a protocol of meeting with DABC, but sending the material out to the DABC prior to meeting with you folks, sending the material to the co-chairs of the BLAC immediately after the DABC has met, and then meeting with the BLAC right after that following week. So we have the third and fourth weeks, as you know, that we've earmarked for our meetings. And so going forward is to maintain that cycle of updates. But we're always open to suggestions on how to do better.
So the next update should come out right around actually the middle of the month, because we have them due the week that I have my PowerPoint due for these meetings. So it should be about the second week of the month.
Thank you, Emily.
And those will always be posted on the website as well. I encourage you to utilize it.
And you've done a great job on the website, and it's very, very thorough. And so to Jessica's point and to others' point, I think that's something that we really need to push out too, is let people know about that website. It's very nicely organized with all of the information in one place. So that's been, I know, a lot of work, but it looks fabulous, and I think it's going to help communication-wise going forward. And just so everybody knows, we're going to continue, as Emily just said, to hold the third Thursdays of every month. Justin and I meet with, or actually Zoom with, everybody from the Harriman team, as well as our staff, on the second Thursday of each month. So try to keep on top of what's going on. If you have any questions at any time, feel free to reach out to Councilor Costa or myself. And we'd be happy to talk to staff in Harriman on your behalf, answer any questions you might have. Before we close up, I just want to do a quick roundabout and see if anyone has any last questions before we close out.
Yes, I did have a quick one.
Okay, go ahead, Brad.
I just wanted to ask Mark if he had any sense of where the construction costs were going in general with what he's experiencing. I just wonder if we should be expecting any dire news in the future. Not that you can forecast these things, but you know, do you think there's an opportunity for savings, given that the economy's slowing, so many people out of work? I don't know. It seems like construction right now is like in a separate reality from everything else. Just wanted to see what your feelings were, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. The right now, in fact, actually, we've reached out even as recently as this morning to one of the cost estimators that is assisting us on this project to get a sense what the bidding climate is going to look like in 4 months. And but I don't think we've heard back definitively yet. But we definitely have cooled off from where we were about a year ago, and so that's the good news. We in fact, another sort of bright spot we to report to this group. We the site work in front of Lyman Moore, that was part of the funds that we took from the surplus as a necessary part of the scope to treat the stormwater at Lyseth. We had 3 bidders on that, and we were advantaged by the fact that we had competition, a fairly decent competition. 3 very good site contractors bid on the work, and actually the load contractor was able to squeeze this in because they had a delay on another construction project, and so RJ Grondin is undertaking the renovation of that site work. It's essentially, we had a meeting today on site with them to kick that off. They anticipate being complete in 6 weeks, and so that was excellent news, and felt very, very good about that. And that was it came in at 5. We had estimated the work at about 500,000. The bid low bid came in at 502,000. So.
Great.
Oh, reason to be hopeful, maybe.
Yes.
Brad, are you all set?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving to Doug Sherwood.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. At our last meeting, there was some discussion about how the BLAC meetings are crowded up against each other, and perhaps a discussion would be warranted about moving one of those so that everyone has ample time to participate. So that maybe one of the BLAC meetings should be on the DABC meeting night I just wanted to resurface that.
Thank you, Doug. And maybe that's a conversation you and Steve and Javier can have with Harriman, and then loop back around with myself and Justin, and we can go from there.
Good.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Anything further from anyone before we close out? Okay. Well, everybody stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. We appreciate your time and a lot of great feedback. And we look forward to seeing or speaking to you all again and getting hopefully somewhat back to somewhat normal, whatever that normal is nowadays. But thank you again very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.
Mark, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.